Okay, let's dive into this incredibly eerie explainer about one of America's absolute most baffling missing persons cases. We're looking at a story today that completely defies conventional explanation. It's a case where the physical evidence literally just stops. It vanishes, leaving behind this decades-long mystery that has haunted investigators and family members alike. Today, we're exploring the disappearance of Patricia Meehan. So we're starting right on a dark, incredibly isolated stretch of Montana Highway 200. The night is April 20, 1989. A 37-year-old woman named Patricia Meehan is driving her car, but for some reason, she's on the wrong side of the road. She narrowly misses one vehicle, but then, tragically, she collides head-on with another car driven by an off-duty police dispatcher named Carol Hetz. Miraculously, both women actually survive completely unhurt. Patricia steps out of the wreckage. But instead of doing what you'd expect, exchanging insurance info or waiting for the cops, she does something entirely unexpected. Now, witness Peggy Bueller. She was the driver of that first car Patricia narrowly missed. She pulled over and watched this whole chilling aftermath unfold. According to Bueller, Patricia didn't say a single word. She just stared blankly at the other driver, almost like she was looking right through her. Then she calmly walked over to a nearby fence, climbed it, and just stood there. She watched the wreckage like a spectator, completely detached. And then, after a few moments, she silently walked away into an empty, pitch-black field. Let's look at the frantic search that kicked off immediately after. When police arrived, they quickly ran the abandoned car's plates and figured out who Patricia was. Using the size of her shoes, investigators actually tracked her footprints into the desolate terrain. But here's where it turns into a literal ghost story. Searchers followed those tracks until 3 a.m., walking about 3/4 of a mile from the crash site. And then, the tracks just completely disappeared. They vanished right into the dirt. In the days that followed, her desperate family flew in. They searched abandoned coal mines, they brought in ATVs, horses, even helicopters, but not a single physical trace of Patricia was ever found in that field. Section 1. Who was Patricia Meehan, the woman before the mystery? Before Patricia became this famous ghost story on a rural highway, she was a real, deeply loved woman. It's so easy to reduce someone to just the strange facts of their disappearance, but Patricia had a whole vibrant life before she stepped out of that car. Born in Pittsburgh back in 1951, she initially studied early childhood development. She was hoping to work in childcare. But in 1985, driven by her deep love for animals, she shifted gears entirely and moved out to Bozeman, Montana to work as a ranch hand. She was taking on odd jobs just to support herself. However, sources do note that by the spring of 1989, she was really struggling. Her landlord noticed she was acting a bit unusual, and her family knew she was experiencing serious stress and depression. In fact, the very day before the crash, she had a truly heartbreaking phone call with her father, Thomas, back in Pittsburgh. She admitted she was under a ton of stress and just wanted to come home. Her parents agreed, of course, but suggested she visit a psychologist first to get some immediate help. Patricia actually listened. She made an appointment for the morning of April 21st. But, as we know, she never made it to that appointment. So the absolutely crucial point here is the staggering number, 380. That is the distance, in miles, between Patricia's home in Bozeman and the crash site in Circle, Montana. This geographic fact left her family and the police completely baffled. Think about it. If she was dealing with severe depression and literally had a doctor's appointment the very next morning in Bozeman, why on earth was she driving nearly 400 miles away on a rural highway on the complete opposite side of the state? It's like a giant puzzle piece that has never, ever fit. Moving on to Section 2, Footprints and Phantom Sightings, a trail of false hope. So while her footprints vanished, the reports of Patricia Meehan were actually just getting started. It builds into this incredibly complex web of unverified clues. Because she left the scene so calmly, so silently, and without any of her belongings, investigators and her family leaned really heavily on the amnesia theory. They speculated, naturally, that she might have suffered severe head trauma during that brutal head-on collision, plunging her into a state of profound memory loss. So the working theory became that a confused, disoriented Patricia had hitchhiked away from the area with passing truck drivers, having absolutely zero idea who she actually was. And the frantic, widespread nature of this amnesia theory sparked a dense cluster of alleged sightings. Look at this timeline just from the single month following her crash. We see this massive cluster sweeping right across the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest. She was reportedly spotted in Minnesota, then 2 completely different towns in South Dakota, back in her hometown of Bozeman, and then all the way out in Tacoma, Washington. And there was this really heartbreaking consistency in these reports. The people calling in these sightings described a woman who looked exactly like Patricia, almost always hanging out at diners or truck stops along major interstates. She would sit entirely alone for anywhere from 5 to 12 hours at a time, just drinking water or coffee. Witnesses said she appeared highly disoriented, often talking or even laughing to herself. When a police officer in Minnesota actually questioned her, she completely refused to give her name. She claimed she was from Colorado and then Israel. These painfully specific details gave her desperate parents enough hope to literally drive Interstate 90 themselves, handing out thousands of flyers. This emotional roller coaster peaked in August of 1990. Police in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, arrested a transient woman for littering. And guys, she looked so much like Patricia that the arresting officer was absolutely convinced it was her. Even Patricia's ex-boyfriend noted a really strong resemblance and said their voices sounded incredibly similar. She claimed to be a traveling missionary, but fingerprint analysis ultimately crushed that final, most promising lead. It simply wasn't Patricia. Over the decades, an absolutely staggering 5,000 alleged sightings of Patricia have been reported to authorities. 5,000. From Washington state to Alaska, all the way to Hawaii. Yet, despite this massive volume of reports, not a single one has ever been confirmed. And none of them have brought her family the closure they so desperately deserve. Section 3. Parallels. The Maura Murray Case. To really grasp just how rare and eerie it is to walk away from a crash and literally never be seen again, we can objectively compare Patricia's 1989 case with the highly publicized 2004 disappearance of Maura Murray. Just look at the chilling similarities here. Both were young women who crashed their cars on desolate rural roads. Both were actually seen by witnesses right at the scene. Both chose to walk away into the dark, completely abandoning their wrecked vehicles and all of their personal belongings. And tragically, both vanished without a single trace and have never been found. It highlights a very specific, very baffling archetype of missing persons cases. The vehicle remains, but the driver just evaporates. Let's look at Section 4, how we search today from enigma to action. While the search for Patricia back in 1989 relied heavily on printed flyers, physical tracking dogs, and, literally calling truck stops from payphones, today's methods for finding missing loved ones have evolved dramatically. First and foremost, Patricia is still officially listed in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, or NamUs, under case number MP8299. It's a really stark reminder that she isn't just some character in a true crime story. She's a real missing person whose file remains wide open 37 years later. If you are ever facing the unthinkable tragedy of a missing loved one today, organizations like the DNA Doe Project recommend a few immediate, actionable steps to ensure researchers have the data they need. First, you immediately file a police report right where they lived. Next, you submit a family reference DNA sample and dental records to systems like NamUs. And a quick fun fact, dental comparisons are actually way faster and cheaper than DNA. And crucially, you want to leave online breadcrumbs. This means building public family trees and setting up social media pages with the word missing in them, so researchers can actually piece together the puzzle later on. And speaking of the DNA Doe Project, let's look at how they are completely changing the landscape. They work exclusively on cases of unidentified remains, partnering directly with law enforcement to give names back to does. They use what's called investigative genetic genealogy, but crucially, they rely entirely on everyday people. By uploading direct-to-consumer DNA tests like the ones you get from Ancestry or 23andMe to opt-in databases like GDmatch or DNA Justice, everyday citizens just like us can help genealogists identify remains. It literally gives answers to grieving families who have been waiting for decades. So I'll leave you with this final thought. As forensic technology, DNA databases, and digital tracking continue to advance at just lightning speed, will we finally uncover the truth behind Patricia's silent walk into the Montana night? Or are some mysteries, no matter how many thousands of sightings we chase, simply swallowed by the dark? Thanks so much for exploring this explainer with me today.